My mother-in-law gave my house keys to her friends so they could come over and party. They didn't know about the surprise waiting for them. I-35F have always had a complicated relationship with my mother-in-law. From the moment I married her precious son, she's made it clear that I'm not the woman she would have chosen for him. But nothing could have prepared me for the breach of trust that occurred last weekend. It started innocently enough. My husband and I were heading out of town for a much-needed romantic getaway. As we were leaving, my mother-in-law stopped by, ostensibly to wish us a safe trip. "Oh, don't worry about the house," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll keep an eye on things." I should have known better. I should have seen the glint of mischief in her gaze. But I was so focused on finally getting some alone time with my husband that I brushed off the uneasy feeling in my gut. We had barely checked into our hotel when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Our neighbor was sending a flurry of concerned messages. "There's a bunch of people going into your house," she wrote. "Did you rent it out while you're away?" My blood ran cold. I called her immediately, and she described a group of middle-aged women letting themselves in with a key, carrying bags of alcohol and snacks. "They're being pretty loud," she added. "Should I call the police?" I was about to say yes when a horrifying realization hit me. Those weren't random intruders. They were my MIL's friends. She had given them our house keys for some kind of impromptu party. My husband was livid when I told him. He tried calling his mother, but of course, she didn't pick up. We were 4 hours away, trapped in a hotel room while strangers invaded our home. That's when I remembered our new security system. We had recently installed smart cameras throughout the house, controllable via an app on my phone. With shaking hands, I pulled up the live feed. The scene that greeted me was worse than I'd imagined. A dozen women, all around my mother-in-law's age, were sprawled across our living room furniture. They were drinking wine straight from the bottle. My good wine, the expensive stuff we'd been saving for our anniversary. One of them was rifling through our bookshelf. Another was trying on my shoes. But the real kicker? My mother-in-law was there too, holding court in my favorite armchair, laughing as she regaled her friends with stories. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but the way she gestured around the room made it clear she was showing off our house like it was her own. I felt violated, angry, and helpless all at once. But then an idea started to form. A deliciously wicked idea that would teach them all a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. You see, our security system didn't just have cameras. It had speakers too, designed to scare off potential intruders. And it had a few other features that we hadn't yet had a reason to use. I looked at my husband, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I think it's time we introduce your mother's friends to our home's real surprise guest," I said. He caught on quickly, a matching grin appearing. "Do it," he said simply. I pulled up the app and got to work. First, I used the speakers to pipe in some low, creepy music, just on the edge of hearing. I watched as the women in our living room started to look around, confused. Next, I triggered the smart lights. They began to flicker ominously, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The partygoers were definitely unsettled now, huddling closer together on the couch. But the coup de grace? That came courtesy of our robotic vacuum cleaner. We'd customized it with a few special modifications for home security. As I activated it remotely, its usual cheerful beeping was replaced by a low, menacing growl. The vacuum rolled into the living room, its single eye glowing red in the dim light. I'd programmed it to move in an erratic pattern, darting towards the women and then retreating. On the camera feed, I could see them shrieking and scrambling to get away. My mother-in-law was the first to break. "It's haunted," she screeched, making a beeline for the door. Her friends weren't far behind, tripping over each other in their haste to escape. I kept the charade going for a few more minutes, just to make sure they were well and truly terrified. Then, once the house was empty, I used the app to lock all the doors and windows securely. My husband and I sat there in stunned silence for a moment before bursting into laughter. It wasn't the romantic evening we'd planned, but watching his mother and her friends flee our haunted house was oddly satisfying. Of course, the story doesn't end there. We decided to head home early, driving through the night to deal with the aftermath. When we arrived the next morning, we found our front porch littered with hastily discarded wine bottles and shoes. Inside, the house was a mess, but nothing seemed to be permanently damaged or stolen. We spent the morning cleaning up, comparing notes on what we'd seen through the cameras. Around noon, my mother-in-law showed up, looking sheepish. "I can explain," she started, but my husband cut her off. "No, Mom, you really can't," he said firmly. "You had no right to give out our house keys or throw a party here without our permission." She tried to deflect, muttering something about how we were always too busy to host her friends properly, but we stood our ground, presenting a united front. "We want our keys back," I said calmly. "All of them, and we'll be changing the locks just in case." My mother-in-law's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but then she deflated, fishing a key ring out of her purse and handing it over. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. I I wanted to show off a bit. I didn't think it would be such a big deal. It is a big deal, my husband replied. You violated our privacy and our trust. It's going to take time to rebuild that. She nodded, looking genuinely remorseful for once. As she turned to leave, I couldn't resist one parting shot. Oh, and Mom? I called after her. You might want to tell your friends that our house isn't actually haunted. Unless, of course, they'd prefer to believe that over admitting they broke in. The look on her face was priceless. In the weeks that followed, we heard through the grapevine that my mother-in-law's friends were convinced our house was possessed by some kind of tech-savvy poltergeist. They'd sworn never to set foot in our cursed home again. As for my mother-in-law, the incident marked a turning point in our relationship. She was uncharacteristically contrite, going out of her way to respect our boundaries. It wasn't an instant fix for years of tension, but it was a start. My husband and I had several long talks about family, trust, and setting healthy limits. We agreed to be more assertive about our needs and expectations going forward. We also decided to keep the true story of that night to ourselves. Sometimes, a little mystery can be a powerful thing. And who knows? Maybe having a reputation for living in a haunted house would keep any future uninvited guests at bay. As for our security system, we made a few more tweaks, just in case. Because while we hoped we'd never need to deploy our ghost again, it was comforting to know we had a trick or two up our sleeves. Looking back, I can almost laugh at the absurdity of it all, almost. But more than that, I'm proud of how my husband and I handled the situation. We turned a violation of our home into an opportunity to strengthen our relationship and set clear boundaries with family. And if sometimes late at night we fire up the app and make our robot vacuum do a spooky little dance, well, that's just our little secret. The whole ordeal taught us an important lesson about trust, respect, and the power of a well-timed scare. It wasn't the way I would have chosen to address the issues with my mother-in-law, but sometimes life hands you lemons, and you make haunted lemonade. In the end, our home feels more like our sanctuary than ever before. We've reclaimed our space, not just physically, but emotionally too. And if anyone ever asks about the ghost in our house, we just smile and say that some things are better left unexplained. After all, every family has its secrets. Ours just happens to come with surround sound and programmable lighting.